Hi, I'm Bob Whitty with KPND in Sandpoint, Idaho. If I can be a fan of Skylight Books, LA's world-famous independent bookstore, from way up here in the Idaho Panhandle, then you can too, from wherever you are. Visit the website, buy some books. You can even join their membership club and reap the benefits of supporting independent booksellers. Thanks.
Meet me on the softer side. Meet me on the softer side. Softer side of your heart.
Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. You can find out about this and all of our other author events at www.skylightbooks.com, where you can also browse our inventory as well as order books online. You can also follow us on Twitter or even be our friend at facebook.com. If you'd like to talk to a real person, we can be reached at 323-660-1175. And don't forget, Skylight Books depends on listeners like you to help support us. So whether you're in our neighborhood or browsing online, buy a book or two to help ensure that we'll be around for a long, long time. Thanks and enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Chris. I work at Skylight Books. I also work at the LA Review of Books. And this is our panel on YA dystopia and why there is such a trend in the end of the world. So welcome to our conversation about it. I'm really lucky to have Cecil Castellucci here. Moderating this panel. She is just a fantastic author here, living in LA. She's right there. Are we on 12 books or going on 12 books? Going on 12 books. She's the author of Boy Proof, The Plain Janes, First Day on Earth. First Day on Earth is the Year of the Beast right there, which is this great graphic novel slash, one chapter writing, one chapter illustrated, wonderful book. She's won the California Book Award Gold Medal for Grandma's Gloves. Her short stories have been published in Strange Horizons, Yarn, Tor.com, lots of anthologies. She's the YA editor at LARB. That's the LA Review of Books. And she's also in this great anthology here, After, which is really, really kind of a fantastic little book that we have for sale here at Skylight. So anyway, I'm going to pass it on to Cecil. But thank you for coming. All our events are at skylightbooks.com. And we also have a membership program that really helps us retain your loyalty by us giving you stuff and keeping track of where you live. So if you want to join, there's more information at the counter. Anyway, thanks again for coming, and I'll pass you on to Cecil.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to steal that piece of paper.
Yes.
Yeah. We're going to share a microphone.
Oh, the raffle.
Oh, we're doing a raffle, too. We've got some books donated. Oh, that's sad. From the LA Review. I have a lot of things that I have to organize here. So I'm super excited about this panel because I don't know about you guys, but I grew up loving dystopian fiction when I grew up. So I'm really excited about this panel and about the authors that are here this evening. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the authors. Oh, first of all, this evening is also being co-sponsored by Intelligentsia Cafe. So if you want to get some delicious iced coffee or some iced tea, they have it up front. But this evening we have a conversation with Jennifer Bosworth, whose new book is Struck. Jennifer Bosworth lives in Los Angeles, California. She's the author of the young adult novel Struck and is the writer, half of a director-writer team with her husband, Ryan Bosworth. Please welcome Jennifer Bosworth. Chris Howard was born not far from London, but he lives in Denver, Colorado now. And before he wrote stories, he wrote songs, studied natural resources, worked for the National Park Service, and spent years leading wilderness adventure trips for teenagers. He got a Publishers Weekly flying start this last year in fall 2012, followed the release of his debut novel, Rootless. Please welcome Chris Howard. Sherri L. Smith's first book, Lucy the Giant, was an American Library Association Best Book for Young Adults. And it was translated into Dutch, Lucy XXL, and was awarded an honorable mention in the 2005 De Gouden Zud, or Golden Kiss Awards for Children's Literature in the Netherlands. Sherri's novel Sparrow was chosen as a National Council for the Social Studies Children's Book Council Notable Social Studies Trade Book, and is a Louisiana Young Reader's Choice Award. She also released Hot, Sour, Salty, Sweet in February 2008, and her book Fly Girl was a historical YA novel set during World War II, which also won a California Book Award. Her new book is Orleans, and it's just come out this last week. So please welcome Sherri L. Smith. So in order to get, the first thing that I thought that we could do is we would have a little amuse-bouche from everybody, just like sort of 2 pages from everybody's book to read, just so that we get an idea of what we're dealing with here. So you want to go first?
So, yeah, but my book's over here.
Oh, wait, why don't we just grab? We can just grab.
Because it's marked?
Oh, okay. All right.
I'll take it, and then I'll figure it out.
All right. Should I start with Jennifer? Are you all right?
Be really fast. I know what it is. I'm so sorry. It's just that it's so exciting. I don't know what to choose. And here we go. I also forgot my reading glasses, so bear with me. I am a train wreck. That is not the story. So this is a segment of Orleans, and I should say that there are 2 tribes they're tribes in the city of New Orleans. The former city of New Orleans are based on blood type, and so the main character, her name is Fen, and she is part of the O-negative tribe, and they are holding a powwow with the O-positive tribe. I'm sorry, I've got that backwards. She's an OP, and they've invited the O-negs to discuss joining forces. And so they've just had a dinner, and now our storyteller, Cinnamon Jones, stand up now on the far side of the fire. In the early days, before the sky got so angry at the sea and went to war, there was a piece of land between them, and they called her New Orleans. She was a beautiful place, a city that sparkled like diamonds, sang like songbirds, and danced a 2-step to stop men's hearts. He sway his hips as he speak, and though he a beanpole of a man, the way he wears robes, made special for times like this, you'd think he the most beautiful woman in the world. The grace of a dancer, Lydia call it. And he can pitch his voice to sound like girl, woman, baby, or man. His daddy named him for the color of his skin, ruddy brown and smooth, and it stick because his stories be like cinnamon too, sweet, savory, and rare. Uncle Romulus say when he a kid, folks come running when they smelled cinnamon in the kitchen because it meant something sweet baking in the oven, like at Christmas time. Well, Cinnamon Jones be in the kitchen tonight, and Lydia be hoping he spin a tale sweet enough to make them O-negs take a bite. I should say that Lydia is the leader of the O-positive tribe. And the people, he say, Lord, the people, they was black and white and yellow and brown and pink as a lobster sometimes too, but they was beautiful because they could dance like the city and sing like the city and love like the city was loved by the sky and the sea. It was the people who made the city of New Orleans. The rest of the camp be sitting around the cook fire, tamped down now so the flames don't give us away, just enough light and heat to make it cozy. The O-negs look satisfied. O-neg Davis leaning back on a log like he owned the place. Natasha sitting next to him, looking even more like a lioness. They be family, all right. I can see it in they lines, the way they both be draping so lazy-like in front of someone else's fire. Brave fools, I think. And that mess running the family. Did you eat yet? Lydia asked me quietly. I shake my head, and she hand me a bowl. She take the last bowl for herself before Caroline take the serving board away. The leftover wild boar and sweet potato will fry up into cakes for breakfast. Lydia eats slow, and I know she be studying Davis as much as she be listening to Cinnamon's story. I bolt down my food, push my bowl away, and whisper into Lydia's ear. Got to check on them boys around the perimeter, make sure they be working like they should. Lydia nod and squeeze my hand when I rise. She looked real tired tonight. That baby be weighing down on her something awful. If we ain't lucky, she'd be giving birth before we move camp again. But there'd be no profit in worrying like that now. So I squeeze her hand back and head to the edge of the light. Cinnamon's story be reaching the point where the sky and the sea can't live without New Orleans being they own. So they start to fight over her, sending their daughters and their sons to wreak havoc. I'd be too far away to hear him naming the storms that tore the city down, but I know the names. Rita, Katrina, Isaiah, Lorenzo, all the way up to Jesus, or Jesus, like Cinnamon say. And that be the end of New Orleans. She loved that last storm so much, she run off with him and leave only Orleans behind. The woods be dark and deep tonight. I smell pine needles, fresh after yesterday's storm, musty and sharp at the same time. The air be cooler here, away from people and the fire. I look behind me and be glad to see we built this place right. Ain't no fire seen from here, the way we shaped the hogans, wove them tight, blocked the view. It'd been Romulus who taught us to build camp in a spiral, so there'd be rows enough to block the light. But it'd be my daddy who showed me how to dig a fire hole deep enough to cover real quick. Uncle Rom be surviving in a group, but Daddy showed me how to survive on my own. I reach the edge of the clearing and wait for my eyes to adjust. To my right, I hear an owl screech. I hoot soft and the owl don't answer, but some of our boys do, off to the left. Then the wind pick up from another direction, and I hear something else, rustling from deep in the woods. I hoot again. This time, there'd be no response. Whoever it be, it ain't our boys. Then I see torches, headed toward camp. Allez, allez, I scream the alarm, warn everyone to flee. I pull my knife and run back to camp, to Lydia.
Thanks, Sherri. I kind of want you to read mine now. So I'm going to read from Rootless, which is my debut. Came out in November, and it is set in a future world where nothing can grow except the type of genetically engineered corn. And in this dusty, desolate place, a young man called Banyan builds trees out of metal and scrap and all bits of junk, anything he can find, until he discovers a clue to the whereabouts of the last living trees and sets off to try to find them. So this is one of the first things that happens as he sets off across the road heading west, and it's chapter 19. I had the nail gun tucked at my waist and my shirt pulled down over it, and I kept faking at the engine as the pirates rumbled closer. They had music blasting, a regular party rolling up. The electric sound of guitars split the air as the first truck sank to a stop. The wind went soft and the dust eased a little. I turned from my engine and made a big deal of peering up at the truck closest to me, flashing the dumbest grin you ever seen. I yelled out, about as loud and cheery as I could manage, "Act like you got nothing to worry about." That was my plan. Each one of those tankers had 9 sets of wheels and a solid box on the back, guns spiky off the top and pointy out the side. I studied the lifted tires with rubber-knuckled tread, the graffiti and tinted windows. The music stopped and the engine sighed, then fell silent. I waded over to the truck closest, waving my hands in the air, and just as I reached the cab, its door came flying open, and all I could see was legs, thighs, as strong as they were pretty. The girl leapt out of the cab and stared down her broken nose at me. Seen one pirate, you seen 100. The mohawks and the rubber boots, 3-foot hair and 6-inch heels. If she was older than me, there weren't much in it, but her eyes showed the true mileage, if you know what I mean. A rifle of some sort hung loose off her shoulder. Goggles dangled from her neck like the dust didn't bother her a bit. "Something wrong with your wagon?" the girl said, crossing her arms as she looked me over. "The power converter," I shrugged. "I think the fuse is fried." "Where you heading?" "Vega." "Alone?" "Why? You want to come?" I pushed my goggles up and squinted in the dust as if I might match her in some way. I could use a little company. The pirate threw her head back in the storm and laughed. Then she stepped closer to me and lifted my shirt up. "So what's this for?" "It's my nail gun." "You always carry it shoved in your pants like that?" "Not always. Just a regular joker, huh?" "Just stuck on the side of the road, sister," I said. "Any chance you got parts for a trade?" "Why? What you got in the back?" One of the trucks began blasting its horn at us. Voices yelled through the dust, but the girl just raised her hand to silence them. She threw open the back of my wagon, peering in at the bag of tools, the scattered bags of popcorn. I was pretty sure I'd left enough in there to look realistic. A bit of food, bucket of fuel. Grab that, she said, pointing at the juice. What for? You're bringing it with you. Your tools, too. I reached for the nail gun, panic coming over me. I tried to pull the gun up, pointed at her, but the pirate just crushed a knee in my chest and I felt my arms go floppy. She grabbed the gun off the ground and shoved it at my arm, lodged a nail there so fast I'd no time to scream. I staggered back, fell. The pain surged through me like my arm had caught fire. My body writhed in the dust. The pirate girl snatched me up with one hand, grabbed my bag of tools with the other, and then she dragged me across the road to the back of her truck, my heels scraping through the dirt, my arm ready to explode. I just stared back at my wagon, and for some reason the worst of it was that hatch left hanging wide open, the car filling up with sand, like the wagon had rolled its last mile and the world was telling me that nothing lasts forever. Nothing, Banyan, least of all you.
I want to read mine with an accent, too. My book is Struck, and it's a little bit of a departure as far as dystopians go because it has a supernatural twist that my character is addicted to lightning and is given her a kind of superpower, if you will. But I'm cheating. I am going to read you the prologue, and she kind of just tells you what the situation is. Ferris Bueller style, so I don't even have to tell you anything about the book. When you've been struck by lightning as many times as I have, you start to expect the worst pretty much all the time. You never know when that jagged scrawl of white fire, charged with 100 million volts of electricity, might blaze down from the sky and find its mark on you. Sear a hole like a bullet right through you, or turn your hair to ash. Maybe leave your skin blackened to a crisp, or stop your heart. Make you blind or deaf, or both. Sometimes lightning plays with you a little, lifts you into the air and drops you 20 yards away, blows your shoes off, or flash fries the clothes from your body, leaving you naked and steaming in the rain. Lightning could wipe the last few hours or days from your memory, or overload your brain, short-circuiting your personality and rendering you a completely different person. I heard about a woman who was struck by lightning and cured of terminal cancer, a paraplegic who was given the ability to walk again. Sometimes lightning strikes you, but it's the person standing next to you who ends up in the hospital or the morgue. Any of that could happen, or none of it, or something else no one's ever heard of. The thing about lightning is, you never know what it's going to do to you. Lightning could turn you into some kind of freakish human battery, storing up energy, leaving you with a persistent feeling that any day now you're going to spontaneously combust, like a bomb is going to go off inside you and do, well, what bombs do best. Or maybe that's just me. My name is Mia Price, and I am a human lightning rod. Do they make a support group for that? They should, and let me tell you why. My name is Mia Price, and I am a lightning addict. There, now you know the truth. I want lightning to find me. I crave it like lungs crave oxygen. There's nothing that makes you feel more alive than being struck, unless, of course, it kills you. It does that to me from time to time, which is why I moved to Los Angeles. As the song says, it never rains in Southern California. But the song also says, when it pours, it pours. The song is right. My name is Mia Price, and it's been 1 year since my last strike. But that doesn't mean I've stopped expecting the worst. Lightning only strikes a handful of times in LA every year. The problem is, I traded thunderstorms for earthquakes. One earthquake in particular. The one that changed the city and my life forever. That day, the day of the worst natural disaster to hit the United States, pretty much ever, it rained. Actually, it poured.
So you can see we've got a variety of things there. I'm not going to read from my short story that's in after. I'll just let you know that it's a short story about a genetic apocalypse where the food is no longer digestible by humans. Yeah, the food is terrible. But there's a really this book. It's an anthology of it's I think 16 YA authors who have written stories that YA short stories that take place after an apocalypse, and we all had to pick a different apocalyptic scenario. So it's all different apocalypses. But Terry Windling and Ellen Datlow, who edited this anthology, and they do a great job editing amazing anthologies. They wrote an introduction, and I thought it would be really interesting to read the sort of 2 paragraphs that define dystopian literature for us to start off our conversation with. So this is what they have to say. To some folks, including most YA publishers, dyslit is a broad, inclusive genre of tales that take place in darkly imagined futures, ranging from stories that explore the dangers of repressive governments and societies gone bad to books whose plots unfold in bleak, savage, or oppressive post-apocalyptic settings. In this usage, the dyslit label conveys more about a story's overall tone than its plotline or subtext of societal critique. The worlds depicted are dark ones, in which protagonists must struggle for physical and or moral survival. Other folks, including most literary critics, reach back to the classical definition of dystopian literature, which is far more specific: tales of utopias gone wrong. In this view, post-apocalyptic novels are dystopian only if the narrower definition applies. Otherwise, they are a genre of their own, albeit one that is closely related and read by many of the same readers. Quote, "In a dystopian story," writes John Joseph Adams, editor of Brave New World Dystopian Stories, an excellent collection of traditionally dystopian fiction, society itself is typically the antagonist. It is society that is actively working against the protagonist's aims and desires. Now, this may be true in some post-apocalyptic tales, but it's certainly not true in all of them, for many take place in post-disaster settings where human society has broken down altogether. To dystopian purists, such books do not belong on dyslit lists. So I just thought that would be a good place for us to start our discussion. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is what is dystopia to you guys?
I feel like I should be singing, "What is dystopia to me?" I actually agree with that most of the books out there that we're calling dyslit is probably the dumbest term I've ever heard. It sounds like where you talk bad about your mama. But I didn't make it. No, I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming society, which makes this a dystopian conversation. My concern, I think most of the stuff out there now that's being called dystopian to me is just speculative fiction, or what we called sci-fi in the old days, and because it implies that this is a utopia, and then you changed something, and I'm like, I'm sorry, who here votes that this is utopia? I mean, our standards have dropped miserably, but given that, it seems like it's the adversity issue and the darkness. I think there's a lot of YA out there that is purely a romance or a comedy, and the idea that it's set in the future and we're not telling kids that it's rosy is what seems to be making it dystopian literature today. It's we're telling the truth.
Well, and Jennifer, I think it's interesting. Maybe you can take this question next, because you were saying about how your book actually has some fantastical elements, and I would actually say that your book does as well, which is not strictly dystopia in the traditional sense that they're talking about the critiquers. What did it say? Do you want to expound about that?
Yeah, I didn't know that mine was dystopian until it was published. So then I was like, all right, I belong in a genre. But I think a lot of the time, like, dystopian for me is often about, people trying to, they provide a solution for a problem, and the solution ends up being worse than the problem itself, and it builds and it builds and it snowballs. And so, that can be post-apocalyptic, like in my book, it involves a lot of doomsday cults, and, they're trying to help people, but they're not really helping people. They're making it worse. So for me, dystopian, needs to have that element of, like, we're trying to make it better, but it's just gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, I would say the same thing as far as the labeling dystopian. Also, actually, when I wrote Rootless, I wasn't thinking about genre at all. I didn't even think of it as young adult. I just had the idea, and I thought the main character would be 17, and so then my agent said, "Oh, it's young adult and it's dystopian. This is this it's this thing," and I so, of course, that. But yeah, and I really wrote it to be a fantastical tale, and I think when people do label it dystopian, then sometimes people read it thinking, it is this world with something changed, and that can be a limiting thing, I think, if you read it, because it's a story, and I think it should be to go to wild places, not just sort of what would logically happen if you created that thing wrong, with this world. But I think that's kind of what a dystopian is, I guess, and that's why it gets labeled as such, is that there is something wrong with the world, very clearly wrong, and people are fighting against it, trying to survive in it, or trying to change it. And I think that's why it's a popular genre, because you basically take a world where there's something very clearly wrong, and you have people who are usually trying to change that. And so I think that even though it's sort of a dark genre sometimes, it's really it can be a very positive one, because and I think people identify with it because they think, the world that we live in, maybe they think there are things wrong with it and they would like to try to change that. So it's sort of, I think that at its heart, that's what a dystopian can be, people trying to change the world and make it a better place.
I'm gonna snag this, because listening to this, it makes me think that The Wizard of Oz is dystopian. Mm-hmm. But who would ever say that it is, and that's interesting, but it is. I mean, presumably Oz was a blissful place before the Wicked Witches, so. Yeah. We've changed history by creating dysfiction.
I've always sort of felt like one of the things that's a real marker of dystopian is that the protagonist usually thinks that everything is fine in their world, and then sort of awakens to a larger world where they realize that there's sort of bigger machinations that are happening, because either it's a utopia that is not quite as good as they thought because something horrible is happening, or that something horrible has happened, and that the status quo is no longer acceptable.
It's like dystopia is utopia at a price that's too high.
Right.
I can see that.
Okay, so now I was saying before about how, I know for me, I grew up in the 80s, and so I was obsessed with post-apocalyptic fiction then, because of the Cold War. That was happening back then. So I'm just curious to know, what was your first encounter with sort of what was your first dystopian books that you loved? For me, I'm going to say I loved Logan's Run. That was one of my faves. And then I also loved a middle grade series called The Tripod Trilogy by John Christopher, which is really great if you haven't read it.
I don't know that I liked dystopian fiction. Probably the first thing I had to read was 1984 and Brave New World, and I did not like either of those at all. I was just like, no, wine doesn't taste like blackberry jam, and I just found it to be sort of nauseating. And it's interesting you say Logan's Run, because like that movie, I did not read the book. The movie scared the tar out of me. I'll use the proper words. That's not the proper word either, but I found that all very upsetting. I was definitely like a high fantasy, send me some elves and let me be an archer, and life is grand.
I was like, nuke it, let's survive.
No, and I'm like, the crystals can save it.
I grew up in England, and I used to get I used to buy 2000 AD with my pocket money, this comic book. Judge Dredd is their lead, almost famous character, but it's sort of a serialized, different characters, split up into different characters, and you get each time, and there's sort of an update for each story, and it's really wildly awesome and super imaginative. And so I grew up reading that a lot, and a lot of those stories, Judge Dredd in particular, is the dystopian literature. As far as the written word, without the help of pictures, the first one that I really fell in love with, and still one of my favorites, is Fahrenheit 451, which it checks all the boxes, I think, of however you want to define dystopia. That's a really classic example, and he used the story in order to say a lot of different things to a lot of different people about the world that we do live in and the world that we lived in then. So that's a real favorite of mine.
Has anyone read The Long Walk? It's a Richard Bachman. It's Stephen King, but I call him Richard Bachman because that's what it says on the book. But it's a novella about a walking contest, and it's sort of like The Hunger Games, but with just walking. And I read this when I was maybe like 10 years old, and I think that was my first, wow, I can completely see this happening. This appeals to my innate pessimism toward the world, and the idea that people would enter a walking contest where if they stop walking they get shot, but if they can keep walking until the end they win lots of money. I think I could see game shows kind of heading that direction at that time. And I have this recipe for dystopia, which is pessimism plus plausibility plus paranoia, the 3 Ps, and that it hit all those marks for me, and I'm haunted by that. I haven't read it in 20 years, but it's stuck.
Well, I think this brings me. I'm just going to talk, and you guys should feel free to crosstalk because I like the cross. This should be like we're having a cosmopolitan, and everyone else is just eavesdropping.
Yeah.
Everybody have a class. So this brings me to, dystopian. Maybe I'll take the minutes for actually recording it. One of the things about dystopian literature is that it's very popular with kids and with young adults, which is why we're here. But when we were growing up, if you talk about a book like The Long Walk, or if you talk about Brave New World, 1984, or Fahrenheit 451, Logan's Run, those are not books that were written for young people. Those are adult books. And I've always had this theory that before there was a real young adult section, kids would go to science fiction as a bridge to adult literature, because that was where the sort of these sophisticated ideas would come for the first time. And I'm just wondering, why do you think that dystopian literature is so popular with young people? Do you have any thoughts? I have thoughts, but do you have any thoughts?
Sorry,
No, I'm just fine.
mixing it up. I think it's because I snatched the microphone. Now I'm pausing. I think it's because when you're a kid, a teenager, adolescent, and perhaps even when you're older, you often look at the world and you see something that is perhaps oppressive, or there's something that you don't just want to become a part of that. And I think that many people feel that way maybe all their lives, but I think it's a very common thing to feel during adolescence, that there's, I'm going to sort of become part of this system, and I'm going to get sort of plugged in, I'm going to become, I'm going to have to be like my parents and like my teachers and this adult, and I'm going to have to sort of play this game. And I think it's tempting to think that you don't want to do that. You want to rebel against that in some way, change things in some way, instead of just sort of being absorbed into it. And I think a lot of dystopians, in a way, can be a metaphor for that. There's this society that these people live in, and they think it's all fine and everything, but it's really not. And then perhaps the protagonist, in some way, is trying to rebel against that or change that in some way, or at least has their eyes open to, what is wrong with it. So that's why I think it connects with adolescents as well as others.
Wrestle it back from you. I win. I think that my simple answer is we've been at war for more than 10 years. And war in a society always changes the literature in the society. It is why we have zombie stories now. It seems to be things like Frankenstein and Richard Matheson. In the I Am Legend collection, he has a story about the Loopies, which is an atomic sort of created zombie. And there's stories that happen after war to sort of explain the wounded soldier coming home. And kids know, you knew growing up with, hiding under your desk because of the atomic bomb and the nuclear war, that things were not all right. And so the books that tell you, hey, look, in this world things aren't right either, but there's a way to figure it out. It's kids want to know what's really going on, and you get the sense your parents aren't telling you, and these books are willing to tell you. And a lot of kids out there have military loved ones, people out there fighting, and they're trying to understand what's going on. And even if you don't have anybody in the military, you can't. And we haven't had a war on our soil in forever, with the exception of 9/11, which is huge, and that defines an era. And I think that because the books aren't being written by the kids, they're being read by the kids, but they're being written by people like us who lived through the Cold War and are freaked out about the hot and cold war that's going on now.
I think you're right. I think that like 9/11 and the Cold War, there was like a little respite, a little a little reprieve for a while, and then 9/11 happened, and I think that there's like this big anxiety that's come back, and I think that it's a way that kids try to sort of figure out how to deal with these big ideas and loss of control. I want to go to you, Jen, but I also want to ask about high school, because I think that like high school is a kind of oppressive society as well, and I think that that's one of the reasons why kids can relate to dystopias so well, is because there are these rules and there's uniformity, and everybody, maybe you're not allowed to wear short skirts, or I don't know what happens in high school anymore, but those kinds of things, and I think that sort of helps for kids to really understand the framework of a dystopian society. What do you guys think about that? Yeah?
In mine, there's a breakdown of society, and I think that's the fun thing about the alternate, the other side of dystopian is that you get like post-apocalyptic, where there is really very little order, and it shows kind of this is what happens when you don't have any control. So that was something that I wanted to explore, because I'm a rebellious person, and I was a rebellious kid, and I guess all kids should be a little oppressed, they should not have complete freedom, but But I think for me, with why kids relate to it so much right now, with a lot of the stories that are coming out, it's also the idea that they can do something about the status quo, and that they're not powerless. In a high school society, like in a high school utopia or dystopia, what can you do? Like, how can you change that world? It's just the world. But in a lot of these stories, like the Hunger Games and the adventurous aspect of it, like being a hero in that world, I think really appeals to kids and kind of wakes them up to, like, maybe I should be thinking about this. Maybe I should do something earlier on. Maybe I should change my way of thinking early on in life.
Yeah, I think awakening is like a big thing that happens sort of in dystopian in dystopian books, where the characters awaken to things. In your book, Jen, the character is awakened to a sort of larger idea of the world, because this big storm has happened, and something bigger could possibly happen on the horizon. But I'm interested with both of you, because Sherri and our stories are more rooted in real science and real sort of
it is the extrapolation you were talking about. If this happened in our world, what comes next?
Yeah, and both of yours have more fantastical elements to them. I mean, your science is not 100% correct.
No, it's not. Science fiction.
Mine totally is, though.
And I just find that interesting, because that makes for an interesting conversation in terms of there are different traditions of sort of that speculative side of things, and so I'm curious as to how much research you did in your world building when you were building your lightning world, your treeless / genetic situation, and then in terms of your blood stuff and plague, and then with my Monsanto genetic corn situation, which we have in common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have corn in common.
Yeah,
We are mostly corn now, isn't that I'm 99% corn, I think. Part of why I wanted to do a fantastical kind of story was because I wanted there to be a wish fulfillment. Are we giving up on the microphone? Should I
We
just...
should keep doing it because it's actually being recorded.
Okay, I will talk into the microphone. I wanted to have like a wish fulfillment element because dystopians can be so depressing, and so I wanted to have this kind of heroic character with a comic book sort of power, so that even though the whole world is crashing down around her, you kind of want to be her. You kind of want to go through this and be a hero too. But as far as the research goes, it actually was pretty valid, I stretched things obviously as far as what lightning can do, but that was the nice thing about choosing lightning is that people don't really understand it and they don't really know what it can do, so I can pretend that it can do all sorts of things that nobody can really prove me wrong. And all of the earthquake stuff, like as far as lightning causing the earthquake, nobody can prove that isn't a possibility, but all the lightning, the details about the earthquake and how it would go down in LA were pretty valid. The fault line that causes the earthquake is a real fault line that goes beneath downtown LA, and the way that the city falls apart in bits and pieces, that's how it would fall apart because the sediment is different in different areas. So some areas, like this area, might be destroyed while Silver Lake might be fine. So we'll see. But yeah, I tried to be as accurate as possible and then take it wherever I wanted to.
Yeah, I guess I didn't worry too much about scientific accuracy. I thought that might get in the way of it being a good story because my initial concept wasn't, I want to write something, that's a dystopian. So, how can I, come up with a story? My initial concept was just that I was in Colorado surrounded by loads and loads of dead trees because there's these beetles that are eating a lot of the lodgepole pine trees, which are, cover the western part of the state. And I just looked at all these dead trees and thought, wow, what if there was, if there were no trees? And I just thought people would build them out of metal as a way to try to remember them, like old scrap. And I had the image. I'm visual, and so I had the image of someone building the trees out of metal and scrap. And then I thought, yeah, they're in this dusty world where only corn can grow, and everything else has been wiped out by these locusts. And my mind just went with the story versus with the science. And so in the book, everything's been wiped out by these locusts that now feed on human flesh. And so it's a fantastical story, not a it's not supposed to be a textbook. And so. I really wanted to write a story about where something important has been lost and is missing, and someone goes to try to find it, because I love those types of stories. So yeah, I wanted it to make sense within the rules of the world, but I didn't need it to make sense within the rules of our world. That wasn't important to me.
You've got a lot of things going on. You've got the moon, and you've got the plague, and you've got the stuff that happens with some manipulations.
Right.
Spoil.
Right. Yeah. It's it was led by my imagination versus how can I sort of some people connect with the environmental themes, which there are in the book. Some people love that it has or they interpret it as having an anti-GMO message, and then other people take great offense that they think it has this anti-GMO message, particularly because they say there wouldn't be these flesh-eating locusts, and so you're attacking these companies by saying there's going to be these flesh-eating locusts, and that just couldn't possibly happen. And it's a story, not a statement. So
That's just their fear of flesh-eating locusts talking.
Right.
I mean, it's like the lightning thing. It's like, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Now, I wish I had brought my glasses, because I'd be wearing them now and pushing them up and saying, well, as the daughter of a research librarian and a scientist, I did my research. And so the world of Orleans, it is a post-disaster New Orleans. A series of natural and man-made disasters have wreaked such devastation along the Gulf Coast that, and given rise to a really virulent disease called Delta fever, that the United States government has built a quarantine wall from Florida to Texas and basically disavowed that part of the country. And so my story takes place about 50 years after the wall went up. The survivors in New Orleans have gone tribal based on blood type, because in an attempt to stave off the spread of the disease, they found that it affected different blood types differently, and if blood type stuck with blood type, it was less likely to spread. And so now you're in a world where O-type blood does not, you can carry the disease, but it's not as debilitating as if you're an AB, an A, or a B type. And so the ABs hunt people for their blood because they need constant transfusions. I had the idea, the whole story kind of came out of my mother was a Katrina survivor, and I wanted to write about New Orleans and what had happened down there. I read an article about gangs protecting their territory when the police ran away, and that stuck with me. And my mom was stuck down in the city for a week after the storm, and she was an older lady, diabetic, running out of insulin, and it was the looters that gave her water to drink and enough to make it through until we could get her evacuated. And so those were the things that were in my mind when I came up with the story. And there was a lot of talk about the sort of toxicity of the storm surge and what was in the water. And my mom, in fact, came down with an infection shortly after we got her out of New Orleans because she'd been stuck in the flood water at one point. And so I called a friend of mine who's a doctor and said, and she's great for any time you want a disease, I'd be like, is there something that can do this to people? And she's like, oh, you should talk to this guy I know who does blood diseases in pediatrics. And so I went and had a disgusting but fascinating lunch with this guy, Dr. Noah Fetterman at UCLA, and I was like, okay, I need a disease that could do this and this and this. And he would walk me through, like, well, this is possible, that's not possible. And I was like, great, what are the symptoms? Is there something that makes you shake? I want people to shake. And I came home with this giant list of things, and then I created this virus, and then I called one of my best friends, she was my matron of honor at my wedding, and she's a biology teacher in Chicago, and I was like, Alice, I've got this disease, and it does this and this and this. How do I destroy it? And she was like, Sherri, you shouldn't be using that with students. And I was like, oh, no, it's in a book. And she's like, well, that's really dangerous, and it doesn't sound safe at all. And I was like, that's the point. And then she taught me how to destroy it. And then I was like, if I want to cure it, what do I do? And this is, it helps to have friends. Her sister is a research scientist. And so I got to talk to her kid's sister, and I'm like, so I've got this thing, and I want this to happen. And she taught me how to retro-engineer viruses from the inside out. And I cannot do any of this in real life, but for the purposes of the book, I wanted it to be as plausible as possible. I mean, there's still certainly flights of fantasy. Would this really happen? Maybe, maybe not. But what's been interesting is to have. I saw somebody comment the other day on a blog. I'm a science major, and I was impressed. And I was like, that's right, because it's scarier when you think, wow, that could actually happen. So that's me and my science. And then as far as like the sort of the layout of the land, much like you looked at where the fault lines were in Los Angeles and what could happen, there are some amazing flood maps of New Orleans that the Times-Picayune had this thing that was a time lapse of Katrina, and it showed you the landscape before and then at the height of the floodwaters, what was left standing and what was still above water and what was submerged. And so I looked at flood plans for the next 50 years out, which do exist, and sort of went from there with like, what would this look like? So.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm the daughter of scientists. My dad's a neurobiologist. My mom's a genetic engineer. So when I was doing a genetic apocalypse, I just called up my mom. Ding-a-ling-ling, hey. But I was struck, and maybe you can talk about this because we have the corn thing in common. I read this article about this Monsanto corn that nobody really talked about it, but it was grown in South Africa somewhere, and it looked really healthy. Everything looked really great. It was beautiful. Like the field was amazing. And then when they went to harvest the corn, they opened it up, and there were only the white cones and no kernels on the corn. And I just thought, like, wow, that is messed up. Like, what happened if, like, there was just no food, you know, or what if we couldn't digest it or whatever? And I just sort of went from there. And you know, like with my story, The Marker, it's like everything is true, that it could actually happen. We could all of a sudden develop mutations where we can't digest food anymore. And I thought that was super, super scary that, like, you know, all of a sudden you couldn't do that. But I think the nice thing is that it doesn't really matter whether or not something is based in, you know, sort of the truth, or if it's got a fantastical element that it springs out of, because I think that these stories, there's something about each of them that capture your imagination. You know, what if there were no trees? What if lightning gave you this power? What if, you know, New Orleans, you know, was walled off? What if we couldn't digest food anymore? And just think about any other, you know, dystopia that you love to read, that, you know, that's got that sort of hook into it. I'm wondering, do you think that dystopian literature has evolved? Like, what are some of your favorite, you know, dystopian books that are out now? And do you think it's evolved from, let's say, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Logan's Run?
I'm going to pass this on because I don't like dystopian fiction. I was just writing speculative fiction, and I have a hard time answering that, so I'm going to pass it. Sorry.
Yeah, I think, well, it's hard because it's labeled, you know, you're breaking things down and labeling them. I don't know if it's evolved. I guess if it's evolved, it's evolved to be such a broad genre, you know, which is kind of what we're saying. You know, initially there were these sort of, you know, half dozen classic books that people thought of as dystopian, and now there's books, you know, some people might even call The Road by Cormac McCarthy a dystopian novel, and some other people would say, you know, as you said in that. Well, and like you said in the what you read, you know, they said that's, you know, people would say no, that's not dystopian, you know, that, and I'd agree with that, you know. So there's that, it sort of branches out into the post-apocalyptic, you know, and it's not really a dystopian, but then people will say, yeah, but it's a bad future, so it's dystopian. So I guess it's evolved to become just a really broad, wide genre with loads of different, almost like it's like saying something's science fiction or something's a romance. You know, if you say, oh, it's a dystopian, that doesn't give you that much information to me. You know, it could mean all sorts of things. I don't know if it's evolved to be, you know, better, but it's broader.
You know, I mean, it makes me think that dystopian is just sort of a relabeling of science fiction, of certain sorts of science fiction, because sci-fi became such a geek-related genre that it wasn't cool to read sci-fi if you were not me, and as a result, they're like, well, how do we sell this now? Because, like, I used to get hopping mad at literary novels that were actually science fiction. I'm like, Children of Men, that's science fiction. You know, The Handmaid's Tale, that's science fiction. They're like, no, it's literature. Yeah. And I'm like, F you, it's all literature. And F stands for fiction and fantasy.
I would argue that it has evolved because I think it's more hopeful now, especially because it's so huge in the young adult market, and I think you can't have a completely hopeless ending at the end of a young adult novel because kids apparently don't like that. So I think that's good. I think that also ties in with what I was saying before about, you know, they can affect change, like they can do something about it. And so that is part of the hope, like you're not completely powerless. But I would say as far as like books that I love right now, Little Brother by Cory Doctorow, which I think is one of the best young adult novels I've ever read in my life. It's so good. But it's, you know, it takes place in San Francisco after a terrorist attack on the city, and a teenage hacker is in the wrong place at the wrong time, gets taken in by Homeland Security, and is basically tortured and then watched, like set free and said, don't tell anyone what we did, we're watching you for the rest of your life. And it's so plausible, it just felt so real, but it was fun at the same time. It was a fun book and an emotional book. And, you know, at the end, I was also left feeling a little hopeful. So that, I don't think I got that from, books like Fahrenheit 451 or 1984.
That kind of bleak.
Well, I wonder if that's the difference just between YA and adult in that respect, because it's like all the adult versions end with a bullet in the head, and that's like as lucky as you, and that's lucky, That's
a happy ending.
it's like there's no escape. Whereas that is the escape. It's like, well, you could always die. Yeah. But you make me think, when you said Little Brother, it made me think of Feed.
Oh yeah.
M.D. Anderson, which I think actually is a dystopian novel, because it takes place in our future where everybody basically has the internet built into their brains, and it's the feed, and you're constantly on the feed, and yes, there's still pop-up ads, but it is the story of a boy who falls in love with a girl who her father didn't want her to have the feed, so she got a substandard version of it late in life that is causing her issues. They're all at a rave party on the moon.
And his is turned off for a moment. It's the first time that he doesn't.
Because they're infected by a virus that cuts everybody off for a while, and then they sort of connect while they're cut off because they're all in the hospital together. And
he
then
awakens to the world being messed up.
And he sees it for what it is. So that's it, because he was in a utopia where literally, if you wanted a pair of jeans, it would drift by your vision, and you'd say, buy that, and they'd show up at your house. And the ultra disturbing filet mignon farm, was just hedges of meat, because that's like your corn. It's the way we grow food.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a brilliant book that is a dystopian novel, and I read it many years after it came out, and I thought, oh, thank God, somebody's finally written this book, the world's going to change. And then I looked at the copyright, and I was like, nuts. People, reread this book.
One of the things that I think is super interesting about dystopia too, and just like you were saying, Chris, that it's sort of this blanket statement for a lot of different kinds of things, but there are these real niche ones. One thing that I've noticed a lot at the LA Review of Books, I keep getting all of these books that are reproductive dystopias. Promised by Cara M. O'Brien, Eve by Anna Carey. There's a million more that I'm blanking on. Bumped. Anyway, and I wonder whether or not, when you were talking about war and about how war sort of infuses, our distress, and anxiety in our dystopian science fiction, speculative fiction, that there's so many multiples that are being born now, so much reproductive technology, and I wondered whether or not maybe that had, sort of infused itself into dystopian. Do you see any other trends like that in dystopia at all? Environment, maybe?
The environment is obviously a really big one. Environmental. It's interesting because the reproductive thing has been around for a really long time, and I remember coming up with a reproductive dystopian novel when I was in my early 20s, and now that I'm in my early gentle 40s. It's interesting because I think it reflects what's happening to the writers.
Right.
And there are all these women who basically, there's a million multiples now because everybody put off having a kid, and now science is making clones in us. And so it's interesting to see that reflected, and then the environment, and I don't know what else is out there that is, food is a big thing, but that's sort of environmental.
Well, and storms, you both have storms.
The natural getting worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the environmental thing is big. I think it leads to often more maybe what people would call post-apocalyptic versus, a true dystopian, because it's sort of like the apocalypse has happened, like the world has ended, and the reason that everything went wrong is because of the environment. Often it's maybe triggered because of human, interference, global warming or something. But sometimes it's just, the environment, we reached a tipping point and it broke, and now everything's broken and terrible.
But I think oftentimes, when there's a post-apocalyptic situation, a catastrophic situation, society, a lot of times in dystopias, society has tried to rebuild
and to adapt.
Adapt into that, and then there's kind of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking maybe we should open up, I think we're getting towards the end here, but maybe open it up if anybody has any comments or questions. Charles.
Yes, thank you. Okay. There's a number of things you guys just said tonight that are absolutely brilliant and talk all the way around the question that I wanted to ask. But the one thing I just wanted to point out, I wanted to ask you if you guys had any opinion about why this stuff has become the purview of YA fiction. For instance, like you guys are just spent a few minutes discussing like what does it mean to be dystopian, or what qualifies as dystopian, why has it changed and become dystopian for young adults. One of the things I wanted, as an example, all the way back in the 1940s, one of the earliest examples of this was this short story written by Robert Heinlein called, I think it was called Blow Ups Happen, which was one of the earliest examples of a story about a nuclear disaster, an atomic disaster. And it might actually qualify as one of the earliest examples of dystopian fiction, the idea of man's technology getting beyond his capabilities. And then the whole cyberpunk genre in the 1980s, which was The Godfather, of course, was Philip K. Dick, but then it was brought about by John Shelby Sterling and Wayne Gibson, has dominated science fiction for the last like 25 years, right? The question I have is, like, in the face of all this, in the face of like the fact that dystopian literature has been around not only in the classics of 1984, Fahrenheit 451, but has been part of science fiction, speculative fiction for the entire 20th century. And anyway, so if that's the case, then why is it that this kind of literature has now suddenly become, in the last 6 or 7 years, or 10 years, let's say, the purview of YA fiction? Why is it that the tropes, the basic tropes of science fiction have now become part of YA fiction? And of course, now I ask this, and I think you guys have already, to some extent,
I think we did, yeah. I think also that, and I think it really does have to do with awakening. You know, I mean, like the awakening to bigger ideas. And I think that one of the things about young adult fiction is it's the first time. The great thing about young adult fiction is that the characters, it's the first time that they're experiencing anything. The first time they're experiencing love, anger, betrayal, whatever it is.
But this isn't the first generation of
No,
YA,
it's not, but I think that's why it's so popular. That's why it lends itself so easily to being written in YA, because it's the protagonists are beginning to awaken to the idea of a larger world, and teenagers are awakening to that idea as well, and I think that's why
more than they did.
I was in YA 20 years ago.
Well,
Publishers are just forcing that stuff into that genre?
I'm going to jump in because I do have an opinion here. I do think, you have to look at the writers. I was reading adult science fiction when I was a teenager, and it was my goal to grow up and write science fiction, and here I am. I do think that YA has become sort of a secret clubhouse for adults that don't want to read about the bullet in the head stories. So they're reading YA because, like, the adults want some hope too. And, like, they've got that new young, what's the...
new adult.
No, I want to bring it up because, like, there's a new genre called new adult, which is for older teens. So it covers your 18 to 20 something year old. It is BS, which stands for bad science.
Yeah.
And it is, but they're trying to come up with new genres so there's more stuff to sell. I do think science fiction, because it's considered a genre that a lot of people look down on, quite frankly, it's shunted to the side, and YA became popular with Harry Potter. It became okay for adults to read it too, so now they're like, well, what else can we...
And the Hunger Games.
And the Hunger Games. And what else can you get published, basically? It's like...
and also because there wasn't YA before, Charles, there was you would go from middle grade to adult fiction, but oftentimes you would move, into genre fiction. You'd go mystery, you do your Agatha Christie, you do your science fiction, and you do your romance, a little Thornbirds action.
Before you moved into So just so everyone knows, like, young adult literature didn't exist until The Outsiders. And what year was that published?
70 something.
Early 70s? I thought, okay. Early 70s. So we've had 30 or 40 years of actual young adult fiction, and coincidentally, we're 30 or 40 years old up here, so it's growing. It's going to keep changing.
Other questions?
Anybody?
Yes, over here.
I have a question. It is, so since half of you at least found your books to be in this defined dystopia, and then maybe you were not a big fan of it, are you happy to be put into this category?
Yes, I'm fine with it because people understand it. I mean, I've spent a lot of my life trying to explain to people whatever it is I'm doing, like, no, well, this is what it is. And now that I've written something that there's this label to it, people instantly go, oh, it's dystopian. And I'm like, yeah. And that's great.
Do you guys feel like that?
Yeah. No, I don't like it at all. Yeah, I don't like any of the labels really. I think it's limiting. I think I don't like lie awake at night thinking, I can't believe they called it dystopian. But I feel like, if you say it's dystopian or science fiction or fantasy or it's like judging a book by its cover. People have a reaction before they even started to read it of what it should be or what it shouldn't be, or if they're going to like it or if they're not going to like it, or what they expect from it or want from it. And to me, it's so much more than a label. It's a story. So I feel like I don't say to people it's a dystopian. I try to describe, if I have the time, I try to describe what it's about. And same with it being a young adult. I didn't write it for a particular age group. I wrote it for anyone who would want to read it, I guess. So yeah. So I don't. I think it's it's like I don't like, I guess, the classification thing. It's to me that's not what stories, they're not supposed to be classified. It's like breaking down music and saying, oh, this is rock, but this is pop, and this is and it's like, what's the point, I guess.
Then it's like alt rock or folk rock or whatever. But yeah, it's frustrating when if you are dystopian and they're like, well, I just barely read a dystopian novel, so I don't want to read another one right now. Or it's good if people are like, I just read one and I loved it, and I want to read more. So there are pluses and minuses. But I say mine's post-apocalyptic with a supernatural twist, just because it makes it sound like a cocktail or something, Or I will compare it to something else because it does get, like, a lot of dystopian novels are. People will think like George Orwell or something like that, and they're like, well, I like that, but do I want to read that, like, for fun, for funsy time? Like, do they want to read that? So I'm so on being categorized.
You had a question over here?
It's maybe controversial. Because this is like dyslit or speculative fiction, do you think it gives permission for you to create a strong female protagonist? Or do you think the strong female protagonist for young adults is here to stay, even if it's not speculative or dyslit? Because I've noticed this evolution more and more from Nancy Drew to now the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's a sad idea that, like, hey, kids, in the distant future, women are strong. Like that. Hopefully, that's not the case.
Impenetrable.
I do think that. The story of the hero has been told over and over and over again, and maybe it is the heroine's time, and at some point it'll balance out. But I don't feel that writing speculative has given me permission to make a strong female character. That's what I write. And again, maybe it's like there are more women writing now without having to call themselves men to get published than ever before, and that might make a difference. And it'll be interesting to see how it trickles down, because, like, there's no roles for strong female characters in TV and movies and things. But as the storytellers start generating more of that stuff and it becomes more popular, which is kind of why I don't really argue with the dystopian label, is because it's popular. When it's not popular anymore and people are like, vampires or something, like, then it'll suck. But right now, people are paying attention to it, and then if you can get a strong character in there, then people will notice it. Whereas, like, when I started writing 10 years ago, I've repeatedly explained what young adult is. And now I don't have to do that anymore. Even if they go, oh, you mean like Harry Potter? Or now they'll go, oh, like Hunger Games. And I'll be like, exactly. So.
Well, and also I think one of the things that we were saying before is that it was interesting Sherri and I had a little glass of wine beforehand, and I was saying it was interesting that it was.
You could never tell.
That your book had a boy in it,
Right.
because so many books right now, it's like the strong female, main character, and so it's kind of rare to sort of have the strong.
That's I loved reading it.
Yeah. It's nice.
I'm like, that's what it's like for a boy.
Yeah. He's definitely a dude. And
he still wants to smooch.
And to have a romance.
Well, yeah, dudes like to smooch.
Nice.
It's true. I don't know where you heard that they don't, but they do. And it's fun, I guess, to feel like you're kind of a minority in the genre to have a male protagonist. It's it's fun, I guess, because I think it's cool that there's something that's being dominated by female protagonists. So it's I like being I like the fact that there's all these awesome stories with awesome female protagonists. So because that's
You like being the boy in the girl band?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Maybe we'll take one last question.
Actually, just touch on something. I feel like the publishing world is sort of fickle, and except the vampire thing, they're like, don't dare bring a book about vampires or zombies. And it seems like they've sort of maxed out on dystopian. Did you have some of that with publishers or agents where they were like, this is done, this is tired, and we don't need to see anymore? Or they were still okay?
When I sold Struck, is still like at the height of the buying frenzy. But I snuck in my new book that's coming out. I call it a micro dystopian. A micro dystopian because it's really, it takes place within like a hippie commune gone terribly wrong, and it's this world. So like it's now, and I didn't even realize again that it was dystopian until I was talking about this book with a friend of mine, and she was like, "So it's like a little dystopia." Yes, it is. So I snuck it in.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head because when it's that whole label thing. When we sold the book, it was to Scholastic, who published it. It was it was great. Then as we about maybe 6 months to a year later, as we started to sell it to other countries around the world, some of them purchased it, but my foreign rights agent, she stopped calling it a dystopian and started calling it an eco-thriller, or or eco-punk, or all these other labels. So it's all, that's why I guess I it's like whatever, it's a label. So she's like, oh, I don't call it a dystopia because they don't want those anymore. So it's it's all trends, so people trying to make or follow trends, I guess.
I think that's something to note too, is like how long ago did we sell these books or write these books? The time to market and everything. I mean, it took me 3 years to write it. I sold it on an idea, so 20 years ago when I sold the book, it was brand new and nobody had ever heard of it. So that does make a difference. But you're right, the eco thing, I'm getting that too now. And I was like, oh, look what I've written, an eco book.
Well, we're going to do the raffle. We're going to put a little table here. We've got books for sale. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Thank you, Jennifer Bosworth, Chris Howard, and Sherri L. Smith. My name is Cecil Castellucci. Thanks to Chris and Skylight Books, and to the Los Angeles Review of Books, and to Intelligentsia. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. Don't forget that you can check out this and all of our other great podcasts at www.skylightbooks.com. Today's music was provided by Fragile Gang. You can check them out at MySpace, Facebook, and the iTunes Music Store. Thanks for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.